Alrighty, everybody, let's take a look at a game that I played a little bit earlier. My opponent starts, I'm on the black pieces. My opponent starts off with a knight move. Now, I'm not familiar with this opening, but that's okay. If we look at the opening explorer, this is the Reti opening. I don't know the Reti opening, but that's okay. I don't need to know it. I'm just going to follow my standard principled moves. I like the F6 pawn, the F6 knight move from black. It allows me to transition if I need to into the Queen's Gambit lines. It also allows me to get my bishop out early so I can get castled early. Pretty standard opening move if I don't know what's happening. My opponent then pushes a queen pawn. Okay, then I am prepared for Queen's Gambit lines, so I get my my setup going. And then my opponent pushes or moves their other knight instead. So that's okay. Again, I don't need to know the opening they're playing. I just need to know some basic principles. Normally in the Queen's Gambit line, this pawn would be in front of the knight. In this case, it's not. So now that does mean that this d5 square is open for me. There's no attacker there, so I don't even have to worry about that anymore. Granted, the knight is an attacker, but with this pawn here, that would be an additional attacker. So right now, my opponent's got one attacker on it. I've got two defenders on it, so I'm okay. We've seen this bishop to g5 move by white. We've seen that many times where they're trying to pin. But we know that our bishop just parks up on the e7 square. And you notice, like, I was able to play my moves really quickly because I've seen all this before, right? This is all standard stuff that I've seen before. So I know the response, and I don't have to think about it. Gives me a little bit of advantage in time. Opponent makes a quick trade. And then this pawn push. So this is the one that got me thinking. I spent a little bit of time thinking about this move. Number one, do I have this pawn protected? Do I have my d5 pawn protected? Well, 1, 2 attackers, 1, 2 defenders. Yeah, technically it's okay. But making these trades does open up the file right in front of the king. What would happen if my opponent stuck a queen over there and put me in check? So these are the kind of things that I was thinking about and trying to decide. If he takes, then I take, then he puts me in check. You know, how do I defend? Do I defend with the bishop? Do I defend with the queen? You know, do I want to really do an early queen trade? So these are the thoughts that were going through my head. But realistically, I have two defenders on this pawn. I don't see any immediate traps, so I just make another standard developing move. My opponent pushes past. Now, this is a strong move from him. He has now closed the center. So the center is closed because there's going to be no trades happening. And he is immediately attacking my bishop. So very strong pawn move by my opponent. He is now controlling the center. I'm trying to recontrol the center, but my opponent has controlled the center. So this bishop needs to find a home. Pretty much, well, I mean, he could go to either one of these squares, but all that's asking for is inviting a trade, right? So if he goes, bishop goes to, let's say, g5, then the knight takes, then my queen takes. And really, I've just wasted a tempo, you know, making a trade. So I drop my bishop back. You know, whatever. It's not the world's greatest bishop, but it does have, I mean, look at these long diagonals. So it's got some capabilities. Plus, if this were to become a target and we start trading things off, my king has got a little bit of protection. I know I'm going to be castling here pretty quickly. My opponent makes a strike down. I guess the possibility of something like this is coming. Maybe he's looking to trade away, you know, a bishop of mine. So I do have a bishop pair, right? So I've got a bishop pair. My opponent doesn't. So maybe my opponent's looking to maybe put a bishop here, a knight here, excuse me, on d6. Maybe trying to convince me to make this exchange, right? Eliminate my my bishop. But really, there's no real crazy discoveries my opponent has with his knight. So I just castle. Castle to safety, follow the principles. My opponent, another pawn move. I'm fully expecting something like this to come to prop up this knight. So now I need to start figuring out how do I maybe chase, you know, maybe do I chase the knight away? I really don't want this knight here forever. I mean, it's not a great knight, but, you know, if it were propped up with some protection, then it would be a little bit harder to get rid of. So I just start... I start my plan to get some pressure along that knight. My opponent definitely follows with his plan of getting his knight propped up, but he's got squares to retreat to. So I'm not trapping anybody, but I am just kind of asking, where does this knight want to go? What are we going to do with this knight? Nice retreat square. So now the question is, what's our plan? So now we are both pretty much fully developed. My opponent has got, 2 moves to really get fully developed, but they do have a strong control in the center. I am fighting for control of the center, but not really. My light square bishop is kind of a dead piece now, right? My light square bishop is not doing work. So I'd like to maybe get my knight traded away somehow. Notice he's got 2 defenders in this square, and I've only got 1 attacker, and I'm really not looking forward to trading away my knight just for a pawn. Maybe if I could get 2 or 3 pawns out of the deal, sure, but right now, I'm not thinking so much about just trading away or sacrificing away. I do want to open up my light square bishop somehow, but notice he's trapped in because my opponent closed the position. So I think, what about maybe we can start weakening this pawn side. There are some opportunities maybe. So let's take a look at them. So this is my thought process. If I can start opening up lines this way, maybe we can get some magic happening. At least try to open the position a little bit. We're closed in the center. If we're closed in the center, that means we need to look at the wings. And I'm not really in the mood to be pushed to attacking on my king side. So my opponent's king is still in the center. They haven't castled. So attacking on the queen side seems fair game, right? The center's closed. Pick a wing. Well, my king is safe, so leave my king alone. Attack on the queen side. So that's my thought process going into this, right? My opponent then trades towards the center, which is a good move. I just quickly take back. There is not a fork here that I'm worried about. It could have been such that there was a fork, but I'm not worried about it now. My opponent picks up a free pawn, though. So he has eliminated the defender of the pawn. Notice, by putting my bishop here, I have blocked the other defender of that pawn. So my opponent now picks up a pawn. So they're up a pawn. So their plan is working. I spent some time trying to figure out what my next move is. Yeah, here, a minute. I spent a full minute trying to decide what my next move is going to be. Right? My light square bishop is finally open, so what am I going to do with it? Do I just maybe throw it along this diagonal? But, my opponent's going to have an h-pawn push, which is immediately going to make me retreat. So where do I retreat to? Do I start this process? Maybe. That's a possibility. So the first move you see here is I put some pressure on his undefended knight. Now I know that knight's just going to retreat somewhere, and that's fine. Even if it moves forward to capture, notice there's really, I guess I could have tried to move my dark square bishop somewhere, but where? I guess out here. I'm not really sure what I could have done. Let me turn the engine on real quick and see what the engine says. Yeah, the engine says go ahead and get the light square bishop out. I didn't know what would happen if I tried to get my dark square bishop out. Notice, my dark square bishop doesn't have a lot of squares. These are all cut off. So, if I move my dark square bishop, it's really only to these 2 squares here. So I just make a slightly defensive move to get my light square bishop involved, but of course my opponent can simply happily trade away, and now he's won my bishop pair. So neither one of us have a pair of bishops. We both have a mismatched pair of pieces. Say that 3 times fast. Mismatched pair of pieces. And so now the question is, now what? Right? Now, what are we going to do? How are we going to get involved in the game? I'm down a pawn, excuse me. My opponent goes for a break on the wing. Totally fair, right? I can either close the position, I can capture, or I can allow my opponent to capture. So those are my choices. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? I'll let my opponent capture. It'll open up the wing line. But what I could do is there's a semi-open file here. This pawn is a weakness. Notice there's 2 attackers, or one attacker, 2 defenders. I could take my rook over, put some pressure along the center, and put some, get some alignment issues. We've talked about alignment issues. Man, how alignment issues have hurt us and helped us in the past. So I'm just going for an alignment issue. See if I can open up an alignment issue on my opponent. Make this exchange. My opponent captures. Now they're up 2 pawns. All right, they're up 2 pawns, and my attack along the queen side not only is stalled out, but I have now allowed my opponent to up the ante. So now what do we do? This knight is under attack. I no longer have an additional attacker on this pawn. But pause right here. Don't look at the answers, but pause right here and look for a tactic. If you see a tactic, you let me know. Do you see it? All right, tactic time. So here's a tactic. Moving my queen out comes with check. My opponent has to defend, but cannot defend both check and this bishop. Now, in the last game we did this, I screwed up because it was the same tactic, same concept, but the bishop was defended. In this case, the bishop is not defended by anything. My opponent has really 2 ways, or 3 ways, really. The first way is they can move their king to get out of check. They can either move their king, which then forfeits their privilege to castle, or they can block with the queen, ask for a queen trade, or they can block with the knight. My opponent blocks with the queen. So now the question is, do I trade queens? And the answer is no. I am down 2 pawns. I am down in material, so I am not going to trade queens. I'm going to get my material back. So now I'm up a piece, and then my opponent is up 2 pawns. So he has traded away his bishop for 2 pawns. It's an okay trade. Not a great trade, but an okay trade. So we're kind of even. But on the other hand, I've got a piece. So I now have an extra piece. Notice this pawn is undefended. So I've got some there. I've got 2 attackers on this pawn already. Or, excuse me if I can get my circles. I have 2 attackers on this pawn already. He has 2 defenders on it. But I could get maybe a 3rd attacker on it. I could push my queen to b4, offer another queen trade. Now, these are dark squares, so my light square bishop is not going to be able to trap. They're on a diagonal, so my rook is not going to be able to trap, so I'm not going to be able to win the queen, but I can offer a queen trade, right? I'm up material, so that could be an option. Let's see what my opponent does. My opponent immediately puts pressure on... First off, he keeps defense of this pawn, but he also puts pressure on my knight. The only thing defending my knight is my queen. So I have to be real careful on how I proceed. I do have 2 attackers on this pawn. I only have 1 defender. So I snatch a pawn. My opponent snatches my knight. I fully expected my opponent to maybe try something else. Notice this does, like I was hoping, I don't know. Honestly, guys, I don't know what I was hoping for here. I probably should have taken more time to think this one through. But I picked up a pawn. So now I'm up essentially 2 points of material, right? I have a piece and a pawn, and my opponent has 2 pawns. But then my opponent takes a piece. So now my opponent has 2 pawns, and I have 1 pawn, so essentially I'm down a pawn now. By allowing my opponent to pick up that one, I'm now down a pawn. And if we count the material on the board, you can see 3 and 3, and then 2 connected pawns in the middle of the board, connected passed pawns in the middle of the board, and I only have a single pawn. So my opponent is now up in the game. If we look at the evaluation, let's see here. Right here, yeah, right here the evaluation completely swings into my favor, into black's favor. A lot more than I expected to, honestly. The engine, wow, really says that black has an advantage. Pick up the piece. Huh, okay, why this line? I don't understand these lines. Well, no, it's not undefended, so moving my rook here, it's not really undefended, is it? Bishop d5, rook to d1. Knight to b4. Really wants that knight b4, doesn't it? Let's look at knight b4, rook to d1, bishop d5. So this is defending this. I guess we're going to go for trading material? I don't know. He's going to move the knight out of the way, which drops a pawn, but rook a8. I don't understand, guys, at all. I'm not seeing where the imbalance is. I'm not seeing the imbalance at all. I don't understand. Let me back up a little bit. Turn the threat level on. So the threat says the threat for white is to come right here, which is a strong threat. It's queen in the center of the board, protected by a pawn. But technically I have 2 attackers in that. Well, I don't have any attackers in that square. Only 1. I'm not certain, guys. I'm not seeing it. Well, let's turn all this off. Let's back up a little bit. Either way, okay. So solid queen move. I thought it was a solid queen move by my opponent. Honestly, I felt that this was a good move. But I went for a queen trade. My opponent didn't, so I'm now down a pawn. And you can see the evaluation jumped by 6 points. It still says that black has a slight advantage. The king is wildly open in the middle of the board. I'm surprised it still says black has an advantage. I fully expected white to have an advantage with these 2 strong pawns. You know, just one quick castle, and that changes the game, right? Either way. All right, well, my point was that my evaluation changed from a -8 to a -2. So it's a 6-point swing by allowing my opponent to pick up a 3-point piece. So that was a pretty big blunder on my part. Throwing in a quick check. Now my opponent blocks with their knight. Now in this case, remember the knight's job is to defend this pawn. I now have 2 attackers in this pawn. The knight's job is supposed to defend that. Maybe he figured, you know what, I can't defend it because he's got 2 attackers on it. Maybe I really can't defend it without, risking my queen again. I'm not certain what his thought process was, but my opponent decided that he no longer needs to defend this pawn, so he moves his knight out of the way, which still gives him the right to castle. But I now have enough attackers in this pawn that I just quickly pick it up. And it also comes with an immediate threat on this rook. So my opponent really, at this point in time, needs to castle. 100% has to castle. It defends this rook. And notice, if I take this rook with check, right? Like, I mean, when I take this rook, it comes with check. So my opponent then loses even more control of the game. So my opponent needs to castle. 100% needs to castle. And my opponent misses it and snatches a pawn. So I took a pawn to even the game. My opponent took a pawn to go up a pawn. But if you look at the evaluation now, the game has drastically changed. And I can either take this knight. Notice this is defended. My rook is defended nicely. My 2 rooks are working together. But here's another tactic. I can quickly take the rook. So I can either take a 3-point piece or I can take a 5-point piece. I took the 5-point piece. Now, the engine says that taking on this side would have given more options for checkmate. Notice, if my queen is sitting where the knight is, the only options for the king is to run away sideways. Well, if I had gotten my bishop involved in the game earlier, that bishop could cut off that square. So if we back up and bring my bishop here, notice, well, I guess my opponent, they have this. All right, so maybe that's not the world's greatest move. Maybe we'd have to do something like remaneuver it this way. Give him another option to castle. Well, all right, maybe it wasn't as good, but either way, the engine wants me to take here because it forces my opponent's king to escape sideways. But I just took the rook. It comes with check, which means my opponent's king has to move out of the way. There's another undefended rook sitting over there, so I pick up the other rook. Now, at this point in time, even if he were to manage to somehow trap my queen, 2 rooks for a queen is not a bad trade. I would have 2 rooks and a bishop versus my opponent's queen and a knight. It's not a bad trade, but there's no way my queen is trapped. I've got all these pawns I can start gobbling up. My opponent's king is, sorry guys. My opponent's king is wildly in the center of the board now. There is nothing my opponent can do to really defend. And I'm going to start, even if I don't gobble up, like, I can start throwing in checks. I've got a lot more control, and my opponent is just down too much material. So they resign at this point. All right, so that was a lot of rambling, 20 minutes of rambling to say, basically, if you don't know what your opponent's doing, have some standard moves ready to go. For me, mirroring what my opponent's doing is perfectly safe. Plus, I know that the knight lives on f6 in many openings, so this is flexible enough that I can, like I said, go to Queen's Gambit declined. I can go to an Italian game. I can even be prepared if my opponent pushes an e4 pawn. I can quickly switch. I can, respond with my own pawn, or I can quickly get my knight involved in the game. So there's a lot of things that can happen, but just have a few flexible moves, right? Have some things ready to go that no matter what your opponent does, it's pretty safe. And from the black side pieces, this Queen's Gambit line also seems to work, right? It seems to put us in position where we can have solid mid games. Yeah, I don't know if the game would have been that much different if this pawn were in front of the knight. I don't know. Would have been interesting to find out, but we've played those games. Yeah, we could even go for like an opposite pin. But yeah, just play the safe move. Opponent decided to exchange, that's fine. I have the bishop pair, I'm happy. So this started out great. I feel pretty strong about it. Get the rest of my pieces developed. If I do this again, maybe I'll look at trying to fianchetto if my opponent. I don't know. Maybe I'll try something different with his light square bishop. I just didn't feel great being parked down here on d2 in this case because it was kind of locked in. Maybe in this case I should push my pawn all the way up. Maybe I should go for the counter gambit, right? Maybe I should try something along those lines. In fact, let's look at what the engine says. Whatever my opponent does. Yeah, castle is smart. What about something like this? Engine doesn't hate it. Because I can still do the same blockade. Now, I don't have my dark square bishop is now slightly misplaced. I'd have to come back and pick up this pawn. But isolated queen pawn. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know. As it stands, my opponent can just take it. But I guess I can pick up a pawn here too. Interesting lines that develop. Either way. Alrighty, guys. I'm going to drop out. Thanks so much. I appreciate you guys watching the vid. Hopefully you guys get some fun games in. And again, don't be afraid to look at this Queen's Gambit lines. It develops in some pretty standard development from both sides of the board, and it feels pretty good to play. At least the way my playstyle. Maybe your playstyle finds something different, but before you know what you like, try some different things out, right? Try some things and say, you know what, I like this, I don't like that. I've tried some Roy Lopez games, and for whatever reason, they don't click with my playstyle. So if I have a choice in the matter, I'm probably going to choose either the Italian game or the Queen's Gambit lines. But if my opponent does play a Roy Lopez, I know how to kind of respond and play some. So these are just kind of, the more we play, the more we learn. And, over time, our tastes change. And so we'll be able to shift back and forth. Alrighty, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.